Hello, hi, it's me, Vicky Marie. I think I am live. Just to let you know, while we're waiting for people to come on, it's very hot here in Spain today, and when it starts to get hot, mosquitoes come out. So I've just gassed myself with mosquito spray practically. So I can feel that my voice is a little bit sort of odd. Right, okay. I feel like I should be doing something, but I don't know. Hang on. No messages. Let me see. Hi, Jill. Jill from the UK. Thank you, because I was just looking round to see if I had the messages on or not. And I do. I can see you. Oh my goodness, Florida. Hi, how are things there? Is it hot there? Do you have mosquitoes there, I would imagine? So I've just literally sprayed myself with mosquito spray, gassed myself, and I can feel that my voice is really odd. So I just have to keep having a drink. But anyway, how's your day been? I've had a really nice day because Manchester City, if you know about football in the UK, Manchester City won today and we've gone to the top of the Premier League. So Manchester City is my football team. I'm from Manchester, so I'm feeling good today. Okay, so who else have we got there? Someone else. Rachel. Hi, Rachel, another one from the UK. And while we're just waiting for people to sort of come along, I'm going to do my housekeeping because I always forget to do it. I feel like there's something else that I was supposed to do as well. But anyway, so housekeeping basically is I just tell you about the Confessions of a Spanish Teacher. Lots of you have already bought this book, which talks about my sort of experiences with stalking and also how I came to end up in Spain and being a Spanish teacher. It's available on Amazon, Vicky Riley with an I. And then I just need to tell you about my day job, as I call it, which is, mind you, this is taking over more, I seem to be spending more time on this now because I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying making the videos. Right, it's beautiful here, but breezy, which is good. Yeah, breezy is always good. We're having a heat wave here in Spain, an early heat wave. It's been 30 odd degrees. Very clammy. We had a storm last night. It's that sort of humid heat, where it's hot, but it's like really humid. And that's unusual now because we're only just coming into May. So God knows what June, July and August will be like. But anyway, telling you about my Spanish books. So I teach Spanish. I teach it online, or to be honest, the books you can learn at home with the books. The books are self-explanatory. Goes from level 1 to level 5. And they're all backed up by YouTube videos, which is my other YouTube channel. And also, following on from that, I do have 3 bilingual storybooks about dogs, which are in Spanish and English, if you just want a bit of fun, really, while you're learning Spanish. That's that housekeeping done. That's it, really. There's not much else to say, housekeeping-wise. So you're called Maria. Right, I see. Now, the first thing as well I want to say is when I prepared this video, or when I was, not this video, this live stream, and we're going to talk about 5 serial killers today. And I gave you clues to each one. So there was number 1 that I called him the forgotten serial killer. I've thought about that since, and I thought he's not really forgotten. I should have probably called him the secret serial killer. But I do feel that whenever people are talking about serial killers, he gets overlooked a little bit, this person. All right, what made you learn Spanish? Well, I came to live in Spain. I was living in the UK and I came to live in Spain 25 years ago, and I just had to learn Spanish. Otherwise, it's not that you can't live here if you don't learn Spanish, but you know, at the end of the day, you should learn Spanish. You come to live in Spain, you should learn Spanish. And also, I had a baby. My son was a baby at the time. And how it sort of came about, really, where I became determined to learn Spanish, was he was quite ill and I had to take him to the doctors. I mean, he was fine in the end, but at the time I thought he had meningitis and I couldn't communicate. I was in the doctors, I couldn't tell them what the problem was, couldn't understand what they were saying to me. And that's when I decided I have to, if I'm going to live in Spain, if I'm going to continue to live in Spain, I have to learn Spanish. I can't live here without speaking Spanish. And I went on a bit of a mission, you know, to learn Spanish, lots of intensive courses, etc. And then eventually I became a Spanish teacher, because before that I was an English teacher here in Spain. I was teaching English, and then when I learned enough Spanish and became fluent in Spanish, I started teaching Spanish, and I've taught Spanish for the last 20 odd years here in Spain. And over Zoom. I teach Spanish over Zoom as well. Oh my goodness, Cuba. Ah, right, okay, so there you go. So, tú hablas español, no? You speak Spanish, obviously, so I would imagine. And you don't need any Spanish classes. Okay. Oh, I'm glad you like the videos. Thank you for that. Right, now let me talk about these serial killers. So we've got this number one that I called the forgotten serial killer, but maybe it's better to think of him as the secret serial killer. Is probably, he hasn't really got a nickname. You know, a lot of serial killers have nicknames. Now, I led everybody astray, because what I said was he wasn't from the UK or America. And this is where it gets really embarrassing for my awful geography. I thought he was from Alaska, which I thought, I mean, this sounds ridiculous, but I actually thought it was a separate country, because I can't underestimate how terrible my geography is. It's a standing joke in my family. So, but as it turns out, he's not actually from Alaska anyway. He's actually from Utah. So he is, you know, American. It was Alaska where he ended up living and where he was finally caught. And that's why I had it in my head. He was from Alaska and he wasn't from the USA, because I'm rubbish at geography. So that's number one. Who is that? Who do you think it is? Now that you know where he's really from, have you got any better idea of who it might be? The secret serial killer, the serial killer that people tend to forget to talk about. So that was number one. Then there was number two, who I described as he's the most prolific serial killer, number two. He's the most prolific serial killer of all time. Who do you think that might be? And then we have the third one was the Green River Killer, who's also a very prolific serial killer, but he's not the most. I mean, the most is number two. The third one was the Co-ed Killer. That's his nickname. And number three, the Green River Killer and the Co-ed Killer, they're both American. And then the last one is a UK serial killer, and it was the Yorkshire Ripper, which I think most people in the UK will know who that is, but maybe people from different countries won't know who that is, or his name. Okay, so let's just go through the names of those killers. So that first one, the one that I'm going to talk about first, is the secret serial killer, or the little talked about serial killer is Israel Keyes. Do any of you know any about Israel Keyes? Anything about him? I think he sort of slips through the net a little bit when people are talking about serial killers. And I'm going to explore in a minute why I think that is. Because to me, if you read it about his case, he is one of the worst. In my eyes, he's one of the worst serial killers. And I'll explain that in a minute. but he never gets talked about, or not very often gets talked about. And I'm going to go through the reasons that I think that is. Now, Israel Keyes was active as a serial killer between July 2001 and February 2012. But we're going to look at him in a bit more depth in a moment. The second one, the most prolific serial killer, I think if you're from the UK, you would definitely know who it is, and maybe he was probably quite famous around the world, is Dr. Shipman, Dr. Harold Shipman. And he was active in Manchester. I feel a real, there's a, I remember this. This doctor, my cousin, actually worked in his surgery, in his doctor's surgery as a receptionist. And she always said, oh, yeah, well, Rachel, you're saying you know Harold Shipman. So my cousin worked for him as a receptionist, and she always would say he doesn't seem to like women. She found that he was really quite off as far as women were concerned. He was quite misogynistic. And of course, most of the people that he killed were women. He killed his patients. He was a doctor. If you don't know, if you're watching and you're from somewhere else and you haven't heard of Harold Shipman, he injected his patients. He would go around to their houses in the afternoon. They're mainly elderly women, but he did kill some men as well. And they called it death in the afternoon, because he'd literally he'd do a house visit to take a blood test or whatever, and then that would be the end of them, unfortunately. But anyway, I'm going to talk about him, but that's who it is. It's Harold Shipman, Dr. Death, sometimes we call him, but he is the most prolific serial killer of all time, not only in the UK, but all over the world, because his total victims, I've written it down here somewhere, are estimated, because they don't know for sure, but his total victims are estimated at 250 people that he killed. 250. I mean, it's off the scale, isn't it? Hi, Finola. Hello. Hi. So that's Dr. Shipman. So I was just saying, Finola, you'll probably know about Dr. Harold Shipman. He actually, my cousin, worked at his doctor's surgery in Hyde. And because it was so local to where I was living at one time, many years ago, I remember my dad, he was absolutely incensed about it, because the people that Harold Shipman killed were a generation that thought doctors were gods, absolute gods. The doctor told them to jump out the window, they would have jumped out the window. They believed in, whatever the doctor told you was true. And he was a very superior man. He thought he was cleverer than everybody else. And he got caught in the end. But anyway, we'll be talking about him later. All these serial killers I will be doing a video on. But I just wanted to talk about these particular 5 today, just to sort of whet your appetite a little bit. Because I think I might be able to tell you things about these people that you didn't know before. So that's Harold Shipman, Doctor of Death, the most prolific serial killer from Manchester, operated in Manchester, just where I lived. It could have been my parents that he murdered, because he was murdering old people. Sometimes he murdered people just because they got on his nerves, because they were going around to his surgery too often. Like some people, when they get older, all they've really got is to talk about their illnesses and things, and they're always round at the doctor's, and they'd get on his nerves, and so he'd bump them off. Anyway, the third one on the list, which is the Green River Killer, and he was an American serial killer, and he was very prolific. He was convicted of 49 murders. Now, a lot of them were sex workers, but not all of them were sex workers. Gary Ridgway is still with us. He's 74 years old. He's in prison. And although he was convicted of 49 murders, they do believe that he probably killed between 70 and 90 women. And he was called the Green River Killer because he would leave them in the river, leave the bodies in the river after they were dead. Yes, Rachel, Dr. Shipman, in a position of trust, that's the worst thing, isn't it? That's the worst thing. That's even worse. And the interesting thing about Gary Ridgway is he was so ordinary. He was so ordinary. He slipped through the net so many times because he was just your guy next door. He was married. He had one child. He was never violent. He didn't get in trouble with the police. He was like your average Joe next door. And so he got passed over many, many times. And the other thing that was interesting about Gary Ridgway is Ted Bundy. Somebody mentioned Ted Bundy. He actually helped the police to catch Gary Ridgway because the police went to speak to Ted, to try and get some tips, because obviously Ted was, he's one of the most notorious serial killers, isn't he? And he knew the way serial killers' mind worked, and he gave them quite a few tips, which I'm not saying that's what caught them, but they helped to finally catch Gary Ridgway. So that's him. He's still in prison. He's still alive. He's 74 years old. He was sentenced to life, no parole, obviously. Harold Shipman. I'll go through that in a moment. Harold Shipman, he deleted himself in prison. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, a whole life tariff. Which basically is what happens in the UK very rarely when someone's sentenced to life and with a whole life tariff. That means they can never come up for parole. It's very rare in Britain, but he was one of them. But anyway, he sort of cheated that because in the end, he took his own life in prison and avoided sort of serving out his sentence. Still alive, yeah. Well, I think the Yorkshire Ripper only died last year, didn't he? He died of COVID. Was it last year or the year before? It wasn't long ago. Thing is Ian Brady, wasn't that long ago he died. But anyway, there's another one we're going to talk about that is still alive as well. So the next one, the co-ed killer, maybe you've heard of him, Ed Kemper. He was American from California, and he's called the co-ed killer because he killed a lot of co-ed girls. But the annoying thing about Ed Kemper or the most annoying thing is, when he was 15 years old, Ed Kemper was sent to live with his grandparents, and he killed both of them. He shot his grandmother because she was going on at him, nagging him or whatever. So he shot her. And then when his grandfather arrived home, he shot him as well because he didn't want to tell him that he'd shot his grandmother. He didn't want to upset his grandfather with him knowing that his grandma was dead. So he shot him as well. That was at 15 years old. So obviously he was arrested for that. But because of his age, I think he only served 2 years or something like that. It was something really, a very short time that was in prison, and obviously he was assessed. Now, bearing in mind as well, this was at there was a time when people believed that killers could be, I mean, it was his age as well, but there was a time where people believed that killers could be rehabilitated. I think that time has sort of passed now. I think now it's more or less accepted that a serial killer, I'm not talking about someone who just, kills someone in a fit of rage, or I'm talking about serial killers who they can't be rehabilitated. There's something missing. There's something wired wrong. It's not a thing that you can talk out of them, or, it's not something it's just something in them, maybe in their genes, in their brain, or what, they don't know. But it's like there's something missing in a serial killer. They have no compassion. They're probably a narcissist. They can't think about, they don't think about other people's feelings. They don't realize the impact of what they've done. it's almost a mental illness, really. So I think that's generally what's accepted now. But in these times, it was more or less thought they could perhaps be rehabilitated. So Ed, at 15 years old, killed his grandparents, shot his grandparents, and then was put into prison and assessed, etc. And then they released him. But they, they released him, and then he started to kill in earnest then. And his total victims, including his two grandparents, were 10. 10 victims he had, 10 victims in total. He wanted the death penalty. A lot of these killers, they want the death penalty because, they don't want to face all those years in prison. And he wanted the death penalty, but at that time, there was no death penalty in California. So he's still alive as well. He's 74, exactly the same age as Gary Ridgway, because these were operating at more or less the same time. There was like this, it was all in the 70s. It was almost like a golden age for serial killers. There was loads of them. But of course, nowadays, I think, I often wonder, what would it be? Could it even happen again now? Because nowadays, with DNA evidence, etc., it's easier to catch someone more quickly, isn't it, than it would have been before. Like before, they didn't have DNA and things like that. They didn't even in big countries like America, they didn't even have, collaboration between states. So if you killed in one state and then went to another state and killed, they might not actually join up the dots, So, but of course, it's all different now because it's all computerized. People work across borders, even international borders, and of course, DNA has been a fun. So there's a lot of killers being caught now, cold cases being solved, like the Golden Gate serial killer. He was caught years later. Well, a couple of years ago. And another interesting fact about Ed Kemper, just to go back to him, is he was 6'9". He was massive. He was enormous. And yes, you're right, Finola. They get very good treatment on death row. The thing is, that's it. They get medical treatment. They get fed. They've got, they can do sort of. They get given things to have hobbies, or so often these prisoners, they do live quite a long time because they are looked after at the end of the day, because the obligation is to keep them alive. There, that's our it's our humanitarian obligation, isn't it? If they don't get the death, and then of course they're on death row for years and years. I mean, Ed Kemper and Gary Ridgway, they weren't on death row, but they're not on death row, they're still alive. Now, and the last one that was on that list, the Yorkshire Ripper, as I say, everyone in the UK will know who this person is. This is Peter Sutcliffe. And he had 13 known victims, and he made 7 attempts. Now, I feel a real personal connection in this because he killed 2 women that he killed were in Manchester, and it was at the time when I was a teenager. And one of the bodies, in fact, both the bodies, one he dumped in some waste ground. There was actually allotments. They call it waste ground on the internet, but it was where I lived, literally where I lived. Okay, see you later. You have a good day too. Yeah, watch it anytime. And where I lived, there was a massive cemetery. It's called Southern Cemetery. It's the biggest cemetery in Europe. It's right in the middle of Manchester. And round the side of it were allotments. Allotments are pieces of land where maybe people who don't have a garden, they can go and grow vegetables, grow flowers, etc. And one of the victims was dumped there, which was literally 500, not very good with, but literally around the corner from my house. And I'll never forget it because I was at high school at the time and I used to walk to school through the park. And after that happened, my mum and dad said to me, you cannot walk through the park anymore. You have to get the bus. You have to go to school on the bus. You cannot walk through the park. And so there was that. And then he also dumped another lady in the Manchester Royal Infirmary, in the grounds of the Manchester Royal Infirmary, which is hospital in Manchester. So 2 victims. He came to Manchester to kill 2 women. And also the other reason I remember it is because any of you that know that case, maybe you know about the hoax. What made it take so long to find the Yorkshire Ripper is that some idiots sent a tape to the police saying he was the Yorkshire Ripper, and he had a Newcastle accent, which is, for those of you who don't live in the UK, it's a very distinctive accent. And yeah, they were looking after my welfare, Finola. But you know, when it's like the end of childhood in a way, that I remember that because it was like that's the day that I realised, you know, that you couldn't. You know, that bad things could happen just near me, like not only sort of over the other side of the world or over the other side of the UK or whatever, but they literally could happen round the corner from me. And then, yes, the hoax tape, when I used to get on the bus to go to work, I would go upstairs because I was smoking then. You used to be able to smoke up on the top of a double-decker bus, and the tape would be playing. You know, and the police would be saying, do you recognise this voice? If you recognise this voice, contact the police. So, of course, we didn't have social media then, did we? We didn't have Facebook and all these things that we've got now, like for any cases that are going on. And that's what they did. So they played these tapes on buses, etc. But, of course, it wasn't him. It was some idiot pretending to be the Yorkshire Ripper, and he misled the police. How much? I mean, he was caught in the end, and he was jailed for it. How much police time, money, effort did that man waste? And how many women died as a result? You know, that maybe the real Yorkshire Ripper could have been caught more quickly if the police wouldn't have been thinking, oh, it's a guy with a Geordie accent, a Newcastle accent. And another thing that people might not know that's quite interesting about the Yorkshire Ripper case is that lady, the one that I was saying that was found, unfortunately, in the allotments round the corner from my house. The person who found her, for those of you in the UK, and depends on your age, I don't know how old you are and that, but there was a character in I'm sure you all know Coronation Street, the soap opera. And there used to be a character in that soap opera called Les Battersby. He was Janice Battersby's husband. And he was in the soap opera for quite a long time. And it was him who found her body. He was the person, before he was in Coronation Street. Let me see, what was his name? Bruce Jones. The actor is called Bruce Jones. And he was the person who actually found the body of Jean Jordan, who was found on the allotments round the corner from my house. And then he went on to be a star in Coronation Street. Just an interesting fact, I suppose. He found her body on October the 9th in 1977. So, okay, so yeah, I'm not going into the full story of the Yorkshire Ripper. I just wanted to outline to you those different serial killers, the ones that I've said, do you know who they are? Yes, Toya. Do you remember Finola? Do you remember? Yeah. Toya and Leanne's dad. Oh, of course, yeah, Leanne, because she's been in it. Not that I don't watch any soaps now, but I used to. I'm always on YouTube now, but I used to watch the soaps years ago, you know, and especially Coronation Street, being from Manchester. And yes, I'd forgotten that he was Leanne's dad. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. But he was the person that found one of the victims' bodies. Yeah, because he was under suspicion for a while. because they always think the person who finds the body is the most likely, is quite often the one who did it. So he was actually under suspicion for a little while before they connected it up. So I'm going to go back now. So that's the 5 people that I'd said in the sort of teaser about the live. The forgotten serial killer, Israel Keys. The second one was the most prolific serial killer, which is Dr. Shipman. And actually, it's quite sad that 2 of these out of these 5 are from Manchester, and Moore's murderers as well. So it's not a very good advert for Manchester, is it? But anyway, so yes, the most prolific serial killer was Dr. Harold Shipman. The third person, the Green River killer, which was Gary Ridgway. Then we had Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer, and then finally the Yorkshire Ripper. So I'm going back to number 1. I'm going back to Israel Keys. I think out of all those 5, he's the one that not many people will know about. But I'm going to tell you about him. I will be doing a video about him, which is, with obviously with photos and more information. But I just want to tell you the sort of outline of his story. So basically, I mean, I thought he was. I was thinking he was from Alaska. He's not. He was born in Utah, in the United States, which, as probably a lot of you know, is a lot of Mormon, where it's the Mormon center, isn't it, or a Mormon center in the United States. And his family, they were members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, which basically is Mormonism. And he was the second of 10 children. So there were 10 of them in that family. So that's a lot of children, isn't it? But I don't know how they got on with that. But anyway, he was the second of 10 children. He was born on January the 7th, 1978. Now, he was finally apprehended on the 13th of March 2012. Now let me think how I'm gonna explain this. Just have a look. This is wine. It's rosé wine. It's Sunday night. This is my goblet that I drink out of because there's 3 dogs in this house, and we've broken so many glasses, or had so many glasses broken by wagging tails. I now drink out of this because at least it can't break. Cheers. Okay. So now his family, so he was the second of 11 children. 10 children. And his family were very strict Mormons. And they were so strict, they even made the children hunt their own food. So he often later on, he would say that he was brought up in an Amish community. But they weren't Amish, they were Church of Latter-day Saints. And yes, he was Finola, he was very unassuming. I think that's how he was so successful. And I think why people don't talk about him is because there's a lot that isn't known about him. He was just like, a bit like Gary Ridgway, really. He's just like your guy next door, your normal guy. He came from, they call it a good family. I mean, I just think, how is it good? Because these people, although they were, I'm not saying the Church of Latter-day Saints are not good people, but this particular family, they identified with Christian white supremacy groups. That, which to me is a paradox in itself. If you're a Christian, how does that go with white supremacy? Because Jesus himself wasn't even white. So where is that? I don't understand that paradox. But anyway, they did, and so they were very strict with their children. And at one point, there was the 10 children and the mother and father were living in a 2-bedroom cabin. How that was working, I don't know. So sometimes the children had to go out and sleep in a tent outside. They had to catch their own food. You know, they literally made them live very basic, etc. Yeah, Ned Flanders. Yeah. Well, do you know what? It's true. Like even Ted Bundy said that you know, serial killers, they're not like gibbering wrecks that come out on a full moon. They're just normal people, like your average Joe, most of the time. Anyway, so when he was young, he said when he was young, he soon realised he was different from the other children. And a lot of his peers, as he got older, they avoided him. One girl said he made her skin crawl because there was just something about him. But he himself realised that he was different from his peers. One day when he started torturing, I won't go into the gory details, but he basically started torturing a cat, and he was laughing and thinking it was hilarious. And then the people that he was with, the other sort of adolescents that he was with, were like throwing up and getting really upset because it was so horrible what he was doing. And he said himself that on that day he realised he was different from all the other, you know, from his friends, etc. And he just accepted that he was different, and he just became more and more isolated and started doing things more just privately, because he realised that he didn't think in the same way that the people around him thought. So yeah, but he was clever. I mean, they're quite often clever. Serial killers, they nearly always have a high IQ. Gary Ridgway having said that, but normally they are quite intelligent. And by the time he was 16, he had built a cabin. Got an insect climbing over me. He built a cabin for his family, you know, to an extra cabin so they had more space. And he built that himself. He was a very sort of handy man, you know, a carpenter. That he started his own business, you know, as a carpenter. But eventually he fell out with his parents. He was tall as well, because by age 16 he was 6'2". But eventually he fell out with his parents because he admitted to them that he was an atheist, didn't believe in God. So they were very religious, and so they sort of disowned him, more or less. That was Israel Keyes. He got disowned by his parents, but I don't think he really cared. I don't know what sort of relationship he had with his family towards the end. When I do the video on him, I'll find more out about that. Anyway, there are allegations that he sexually assaulted a girl in the late 90s, but this was not his first assault. But it was the first time that he had actually used a knife during the assault. He had assaulted girls before, but it was the first time he'd actually used a knife, and he had intended to kill her. He admitted later, but he just didn't. In the end, it just didn't happen. Anyway, he then joined the military. Now, I think that's a bit of a red flag, isn't it, really? Because, you know, if you have got those sort of tendencies, I suppose the military is a good place to go to try. You know, he says that he didn't kill anybody while he was in the military, but he did admit that he did rape in the military. He started drinking a lot of alcohol. You know, had a big problem with alcohol. Anyway, when he finally came out, he was honourably discharged from the military, and he came out. He was living what you would call a normal life. He was working as a carpenter. He had a girlfriend. He had a daughter with his girlfriend. But all the time while they were living, you know, playing happy families and living this normal life, you know, whatever that is, he was planning, you know, lots of different nefarious activities, not only murders, etc., all over the United States. So he insisted later on that he never did anything to children or to parents of children, because he was a father by then. And to all intents and purposes, everyone says he was a fantastic father. which again is like strange when you think about what he was capable of. But police are sceptical of that. They think he may well have killed children. Right, so he admitted to, when he was finally caught, he admitted to 2 rapes, bank robberies, arson, burglary of between 20 to 30 properties, because what he would do was steal money to fund what he wanted to do. And what he wanted to do was go all over America, all different places, looking for victims. And what he was very careful to do was to not choose local victims. So he would go, miles away. He would fly miles away. He was very lucky in a sense that he had a girlfriend who didn't seem to question where she thought he was. I don't know, when he was going off on these killing trips. I don't know what he would have said to her, but she didn't, she was quite passive. She didn't stop him going or wonder where he'd gone. And what he did, he went to all different states and he buried kill kits in these states. So what he would do, he would bury like a tin with guns in it, duct tape, anything you would, think you might need to commit a robbery or a murder. And he would bury them somewhere or hide them somewhere so that when he went back to that area, he didn't have to carry it around with him, because he would buy it while he was there, bury it. And then when he went back there, he knew where to go to find it. So that was something he did. So he didn't plan his victims in the sense he might just go off to one particular state and he wouldn't have a particular victim in mind. This is the other thing that's unusual about him. He didn't care who the victim was. Most serial killers, they have sort of a typology. They have it might be sort of young brunette girls, or it might be men, or whatever it is. They normally have a pattern of victimology, a type of person that they would go for. But he didn't care. He even said he didn't care. You just took what you could, and sometimes you were lucky and sometimes you weren't, but it didn't matter who it was. Just he enjoyed killing, so it didn't really matter whether they were young, old, thin, fat, blonde, dark, whatever. If an opportunity came up, he would take it. And he said, sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not. One thing that I always remember, because he said that he would never choose a house where there were dogs in it. Well, there's 3 dogs in my house, so it makes me feel comfortable that maybe serial killers would avoid it. But he wouldn't choose a house. He would case out a house, so it was normally a ground floor. He would watch it for a while and see the comings and goings. But if there were dogs there, that would be a definite no. So that's something he would avoid. But he had no victim profile in particular. He just took what he could get. So he hid these kill kits around the country. He had no connection to any of his victims, and that's although we only know of 3 definite victims. But when he finally died, because he did self-delete in the end, he left a note, and on the note there were 11 skulls, and the police believe like Eagle, talk about focus. The police believe that the 11 skulls that he left on his suicide note, I probably shouldn't have said the S word there, but never mind, meant he had in total 11 victims, but he was only prosecuted, if you like. The girl in the coffee shop, I'm coming to her now. I mean, it's heartbreaking, isn't it? But of course it is heartbreaking for her, because it would never bring her back. But that is what caught him. When he finally made that last murder in his own hometown, in Anchorage, in Alaska, that was the undoing of Israel Keys, because he broke all his rules that he normally travelled all over the United States and made sure he was nowhere near home. with Samantha, for some reason that night he decided to go local, and that's what undid him. But anyway, let's see, where can we how can I'm just don't want to miss anything out. So yeah, so he's been doing all these things randomly, and as I say, we don't know, we only know about 3 definite victims. There was a couple, but they think there was another couple as well that he admitted to. Then there was a couple that they definitely know about, but that wasn't in Alaska, again was in the United States. And then there was also, and something I didn't know actually until I started researching for this, that there was a young girl, Julie Harris, who was a 13-year-old Paralympian, and she was murdered, and they think that he did that. So despite him saying that he didn't kill any children, it's likely that he did. She was 13 years old. But again, when I do the video on him, then I'll have more details of that. But yeah, this particular night that led to his undoing, but unfortunately led to the death of Samantha Kearney, he was edgy. He was going on a cruise the next day. I mean, you just can't understand how these people think. So he's going on a cruise the next day. It was all planned, booked. We're all going on a cruise. The night before, he says he just, I think he was just wandering around. He just had that sort of unsettled thing. And I think he was looking for money as well. So maybe he needed money to go. I mean, the cruise was booked, but maybe he wanted extra money to go on this cruise, etc. He went to a coffee kiosk, which was in the middle of nowhere, basically, which probably served more sort of truckers and things like that. Looked a very lonely place for a girl to be working on her own, to be honest. And it was a really bad night, like obviously it's Alaska, so it's snowing, etc. And yes, he might have had a split. He said he was 2 different people. In one of his interviews, he said, "There's nobody knows me. There's a lot of people think they know me, but nobody knows me because I am 2 people." He actually said that himself. Anyway, so he decided to rob this coffee kiosk. And unfortunately, inside this kiosk was Samantha, a young girl. I think she was 17, actually. I think she was only 17. He must have thought it was Christmas, really, because she's a very attractive girl. And like he was saying, you just sort of hoped, yeah, have you seen it, Finola? I mean, it was just like in the middle of nowhere, this small coffee shop. It's snowing. It wasn't safe. I mean, there was CCTV in there, but do you know, I hate CCTV really, because I think sometimes CCTV is used to police things, but CCTV won't help anybody in the moment. It help afterwards to find out who actually did the crime. But in that moment, it's not like having a policeman there or a security guard or whatever. It's just a camera. Might film the thing and maybe it leads to the actual arrest of the perpetrator, but it doesn't protect anybody. You know, it's just a camera. Anyway, she had CCTV, but it didn't help her, bless her. Anyway, so he went to get a coffee and his intention was to rob. And then when he saw Samantha, I think it just occurred to him that he could do a little bit more than rob here. And he frightened her into, turning off all the lights, and so that can't remember any of the victims except that one. Yes, well, that's it, because we don't really know about. There was the couple. I don't know if I've written their names down here, but when I do the video, I will be concentrating, because I like to concentrate on the victims. I think it was Bill was the guy, but anyway, I will put all that in the video. He then marched her off like at gunpoint to the car. I think she tried to run off once, and then he just caught her, and she would have been terrified, bless her. But what he said to her was, we're going to go and I'm kidnapping you, and we're going to put a ransom for you, and don't worry, you'll be, nothing's going to happen to you, etc. And I mean, what choice did she have really but to go with him? He then took her home, took her to his house where his girlfriend and daughter lived, and put her in the shed and tied her up. He then went and did whatever, had dinner or whatever he was doing with the family, took a bottle of wine and went out to the shed. And you know, you can imagine what happened after that, but she didn't survive, let's say. As I say, I don't like going into gory details. But of course, he's going on the cruise the next day. He's going on. He had to get his daughter up. Anyway, so off they went on the cruise. He left Samantha in the shed. It was freezing cold temperatures. Left her in the shed. Went off on. I mean, how do you do that? You've got to have something missing, haven't you, to be able to do that? But anyway, he went off on the cruise. Came back a week later, and of course, and then he did unfortunately abuse her body again. And then the worst thing was that he then made it look like she was alive by actually, and this sounds awful, be prepared for this now, because if you're a bit of a nervous disposition, you don't want to hear this part, so I'm just warning you, because he actually sewed open her eyes, took a photo of her with today's newspaper as if she was still alive. And that's how he put out a ransom for her. Her father was frantic. Her father had gone to pick her up that night. He was due to pick her up. And of course, there's nobody there. And then, a poor father, you can imagine how he was, the appeals that he made, etc. And then, anyway, at least he did find out what happened to her in the end. Because believe me, anyway, let's carry on before I get to that. So he did that. He went and picked up the ransom. And then what he did with her was he cut her up and he put her under the ice. He went ice fishing. Now, I don't know much about... oh, thank you, John Smith. You're welcome. So he went ice fishing. So what the fishermen do, they go, obviously in Alaska where it's all frozen over, they go to the river, they cut a hole in the ice and they fish in that hole, get the fish out that hole. So that's what he did. And they cover themselves up with a tent because obviously it's freezing. So he went out there, did that, and put the parts of her body underneath the ice. And she would never have been found. Never, ever, ever, ever been found. And although, as I think I've said in other videos, although I know it's no comfort, but it is a comfort in a way when, when families do find out at least where their loved one is and can give them a burial, etc. It is more of a comfort than just never knowing what's happened to them. So it's something, it's a small thing, but it's something. Anyway, then so the way he got caught in the end, now she was his last murder, because obviously there was a lot of interest from the police about Samantha, etc. They didn't really have much to go on except the CCTV. They could just vaguely see a car, that she was marched out by a tall man who was all sort of covered up and everything. But I mean, there was no way that anybody could recognize him. But I think they had some CCTV footage of the car, not the number plate, but maybe it was a white car or whatever. As I say in the actual video that I make, I'll have the more precise details. And so they were sort of, out on the lookout a little bit, but he was just caught so, bit like the Yorkshire Ripper, who was caught for the false number plates. This quite often happens, doesn't it, with serial killers? When they finally get caught, it's just some random sort of thing, that you wouldn't expect. And he was stopped in his car. I'm trying to think what he was actually stopped for. I can't remember, but it will go in the video. But the policeman, so this is fantastic police work. These policemen, I really do think after a while in the police, you must develop this sort of instinct. So the policeman has stopped him. He's given him his driving license. He wasn't in Alaska at the time, but he had an Alaskan driving license. He must have known something about this, what happened in Alaska, and that's how he was caught. That's how he was caught, because he was, you know, driving around with the wrong, and then they found some of it. I think he'd been trying to, hi Keely, hi. I think he'd been trying to use her credit card. I think he had used her credit card, you know, even though he'd had the ransom money and everything. I mean, they're just greedy as well in the end, aren't they? It's just like, you know, sometimes, I don't know if you've ever heard people talk about serial killers eventually unraveling. You know, they get to a point, they start off very careful, like Israel Keyes was very, very careful in everything that he did. Everything was meticulously planned. But as time goes on, they start to unravel, they get lost in, they start to feel invincible, and that, you know, they can, they call it unraveling. It's just everything starts to disintegrate, and they're not as careful as they might have been. So his mistake was to take Samantha Koenig from a local place like that. And, you know, if he would have carried on doing his, you know, going off all over America to different states, etc., would he still be doing it now? I mean, you just don't know. How would he have been caught? Or if that policeman wouldn't have had that hunch that there was something wrong, you know. Gosh, I do sort of feel sorry for the police when you see them stopping people and they don't know who they're stopping, whether they've got a gun, what, you know. It's brave, really, isn't it? Because you don't always know what you're stepping into. So, aha, hello, Jim. Hi. Oh, and is Ali in chat as well? I haven't seen Ali. Oh, sorry, I thought you said Ali. So yeah, you're coming. You arrived a little bit late, Jim, but we're coming to near. We're not far from there. No, still a little bit to go. We're talking about Israel Keyes. Did you know about Israel Keyes? He was the first one on that list. I call him the forgotten serial killer, but I've decided to change it to the secret serial killer because a lot of people don't know about him. He was, he was, to me, he's one of the worst, but he just slipped under the radar a bit, I think, because he kept everything so secretive. Anyway, so they've got him in custody. They finally got him in custody, and his concern straight away was for his daughter. So that's the other thing I don't. So how would he? I mean, obviously, I can see how he cares about his daughter, but he didn't care about Samantha. You know, she's someone's daughter. Her father was desperate looking for her. It's just like this thing of, well, it's not my daughter, so she doesn't count. You know, that he could do that horrible thing to her. But he adored his daughter and he wanted to protect his daughter. So he didn't want her to find out about him, you know, the things he'd done, the terrible things he'd done. So that's how he ended up giving up Samantha's body, because it was like a bit of a plea deal, you know, that he would say where Samantha was in return for discretion, if you like, from the police, that his daughter wouldn't get to find out what he'd done. But I mean, the police can't stop that getting out, really. But I don't know what was actually said in between them. The other thing he wanted was an execution date. He wanted to be executed. Again, because he didn't want to face his daughter, really. That's it. He didn't want to go through a trial. He didn't want. He wanted a date that he would be executed straight off, and that's when he started offering up some of his other victims. Because then Bill and Lorraine, Bill and Lorraine were the other couple, and then there was another couple, a younger couple. They would never. Well, they were never found because. The house, it's a bit of a long story, I'll go into that in the video, but their bodies were never found. But he did tell them that he had killed them. And then the other couple he told them about, and he said that he'd committed, he kept tantalizing them, you know, with bits of information. and he said that he had committed arson. He'd burned a trailer, and the police think that was another murder, because there was a murder of a mother in her trailer. Her trailer was set on fire and her daughter disappeared, and then the daughter was found later on in Woodland and she was also deceased, and they think that Israel Keyes did that. But unfortunately he took himself from this world, because when he was started to realise that he wasn't going to just get an execution date, he couldn't control the narrative, he then deleted himself while he was in prison with a ballpoint pen and also a ligature, and he left some sort of weird drawings, and as I say, these 11 skulls, which drawings of 11 skulls, some of the drawings were in blood, his own blood, and a few ramblings, because he was quite into Satanism and that. When he finally sort of rejected God and he told his parents that he was an atheist, he started dabbling in Satanism, etc. And some of the notes and things he left were sort of like quite Satanist. Is that a word? I don't actually know if that's a word, because they were done in blood, etc. I don't know if he left a note for his daughter. I need to look into that more when I finally do the video of it. So, I mean, he again, to me, is like just look like you were saying earlier. He's unassuming. He just looked like the guy that might live next door. You wouldn't notice him in the street. He's quite good looking, tall, but not stand out. Nothing about him stood out. He's just like normal. He had quite a bit of plastic surgery, because when he was young, he had quite a flat nose, almost like a boxer's nose. And in some of these trips that he would go and rob banks, I mean, I'm laughing. I don't mean to laugh. It's a nervous laugh. You just can't believe that these people do these things. He would rob the banks and then he would use that money to have plastic surgery while he was sort of traveling around America. I don't think he went to public school, Jim. I don't that well. I know he didn't, because he went to, they were Church of the Latter-day Saints, so it wasn't a public school. But anyway, so that's the story of Israel Keyes, or the brief story of Israel Keyes, for those of you that might not know about him, because, as I say, he is like the secret serial killer, or the serial killer that people always forget to mention. Maybe it's something because there was only 3 victims that he actually confessed to, even though they think he committed 11 in total. But to me, he's distinctive because of Samantha's murder, how horrible it was, and what he did to make her look as if she was alive, to get the ransom money from the father, etc. is just, I think that's nearly one of the, I mean, I have this sort of morbid fascination with serial killers. I don't know why. I have no idea why, but I think it's because I want to understand the way they tick, which is ridiculous, really, because I'll probably never understand the way they tick. But to me, he's the worst. He's the coldest, and because he didn't have a victim profile either. He was just like anybody would do. He just liked killing, and it didn't matter who it was. He didn't even have a sort of a victim profile or anything. It's just, for me, he is one of the worst, if not the worst. Maybe not in the volume. I mean, Harold Shipman perhaps is the worst, because as we were saying earlier, his position of trust, isn't it? So what do you think anyway? Let me know, because I'm going to go now, because we've just gone over an hour, and then I can feel my voice is disappearing again. I'm surprised I could even, after I gassed myself with that mosquito spray, I'm surprised I could even talk all the way through it. I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to talk through this. But yeah, so let me know. Let me know what you think. Who are serial killers that maybe intrigue you the most, that you think are maybe the worst? Not only for the amount of people they've killed, but maybe for the the sort of ferocity of it. I mean, of course, Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, he picked on vulnerable sex workers. That's because, you know, and at the time, I mean, it's a bit different now, but at the time, you know, they call them the less dead, don't they? Because they just weren't considered sort of valuable. You know, they put themselves in that position, and it was almost like, you know, and it was only really if people heard that he'd murdered somebody who wasn't a sex worker, they were all outraged. But you know, sex workers are vulnerable. Gary, the Green River killer, he also mainly killed sex workers. But they're easy because they get in the car. You know, they don't have a choice. And they're just easy prey, aren't they? So they're other vulnerable people, like, you know, vulnerable people. Okay, so I can definitely feel my voice going now. So thank you, everyone who's watching. If you missed the beginning of it, maybe you can catch up. I want you to let me know in comments who you think is the worst serial killer. I'm laughing again. I tend to laugh when I'm nervous. It's like, why is it so fascinating? Why is it so fascinating? Why are serial killers so fascinating? What is it this like? We just can't believe that they do these things, can we? I think it's just like this morbid curiosity. Yes, he was, Jim. Exactly. He was treated like a wild animal when he was a child and left outside in a tent, and he had to hunt his own food. All the children, because there was 10 of them, in 10 children, was it 10 or 11? But anyway, they all had to hunt their own food. They actually had to catch their own food. So, yeah, that maybe explains it a little bit. But of course, his other siblings didn't turn into serial killers, as far as we know, unless they did and we just don't know about it. Okay, so remember, always live and love very wisely, as always. And I will see you really soon in the next video. And until then, may your God go with you. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.